Anna, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar today. It's for me, it's good now to focus a bit on this issue and not to be too much distracted from what's going on the other side of the Atlantic this morning. But we talked today about 100% RE and participatory energy modeling and the results of our models. And what I'm saying now, and many of the issues that we discussed are also summarized in a recent study that we and as Bread for the World and World Future Council have published on our lessons learned from our work on RE roadmaps, achieving 100% RE for all. You will find the study. I think Anna will share a link later with you so that you can find it. What I just missed, I think someone has, again, my name, Joachim Fünfgeld. I work with Bread for the World. I'm policy advisor on energy. Bread for the World is a German development organization working with partner organizations in the global south, mainly on eradicating poverty, and in my case, energy policy and energy poverty. And I will speak a bit about the value of participatory energy modeling, why we think energy modeling and especially a participatory approach are helpful. Next slide, please. And is it not working? Yes, no, thank you. And one of the important points or moments in the recent years, which made us also intensify our work on 100% RE, was the Marrakesh Declaration from 48 countries of the global south, declaring they would want to go 100% RE. That was in 2016, and many of you might remember this moment. It really gave some sort of push, I think, to the 100% RE movement. Was a big moment. And of course, announcing such targets is one thing, implementing them is another. And it's, of course, we have to see that not so much in terms of really implementing 100% RE has happened, or at least the speed needs to increase dramatically, both if we want to achieve SDG 7 energy access targets and of course climate targets. So we need to speed up the road towards 100% RE. And next slide, please. And we have worked together with the World Future Council in various countries. We presented an energy model on 100% RE in 2016 for Tanzania, which us, Bread for the World and World Future Council and CAN Tanzania, together with Sven, who's speaking today, we developed a similar model in Bangladesh with our local partner CDP. And the World Future Council and La Ruta del Clima published also an energy model for Costa Rica in 2019. So those were countries that we have been active in with participatory energy modeling approaches, and we are talking about our experiences in those countries today. And I'm happy that with my friend Sixbert Mwanga from Tanzania, a colleague, will talk on the experiences in Tanzania today as well. Next, please. So why do we think energy modeling will help us in achieving 100% RE? I remember when we started to work in Tanzania in the first workshops and discussed with stakeholders about the energy future, about their vision of how the energy future is supposed to look like, we always got questions about the feasibility of 100% RE. We always received questions from stakeholders, hey, we see that it might be feasible to power a village with 100% RE, to power homes with solar home systems, but is it really feasible to power industry, traffic, all that, a real country? Tanzania has the vision to become a middle-income country soon. Is that really possible to power with 100% RE? So the proof of feasibility is really a key issue, and I mean, we still have to say, not only in the global south, if I follow discussions in Germany, still the feasibility of 100% RE is questioned. So real energy modeling can help to prove the feasibility. A second important aspect that we noticed why it's helpful is just to highlight the RE potential. oftentimes government representatives, parliamentarians, people in agencies, they are not fully aware of what RE potential there is, how big the potential of solar, wind, and other resources really is, where the best spots are, and if there are maybe some technologies they didn't have in their mind. In Bangladesh, for example, we had the case that there's big offshore wind potential, which many state officials were not aware of. So highlighting that potential itself is a great value. Then for governments, such energy modeling can really justify and help setting renewable energy targets, because the models can really explain, okay, how and in which speed renewable energy capacity needs to be added. In Germany also currently we are talking a lot about climate and also renewable targets, and I think in many countries these discussions happen, and so the energy models really help to justify and really discuss the setting of RE targets. Also, the modeling enables long-term planning, especially for necessary infrastructure, which takes time to build, and you need to know when do you have to start building bigger power lines or other infrastructure. So this kind of long-term planning gets enabled with those models. You also estimate investment needs, which in the case of the Global South might be an important point for also development cooperation, multilateral development banks and all that to really know how high are the investment needs. And lastly, definitely not least, an advantage is to describe really possible future development pathways and their co-benefits. So how can in those models, in those scenarios, how can we reach energy access? What impact do the different scenarios have on greenhouse gas emissions, on climate targets? What are the implications for job creation, on GDP growth, on the trade balance? Many countries want to become independent of energy imports or less dependent on some neighboring countries for political reasons. So all those co-benefits of different development pathways can be described, and that really helps to shape political decisions. So these are the main reasons, I guess, why we think energy modeling is helpful. And the actual question then is, why participatory energy modeling? Next slide, please. The easy answer would say that we think energy modeling shouldn't be an academic discussion and task itself, but it needs to become a political one. So creating political relevance is really key, because you can, in the academic sphere, do those scenarios, write great studies, but if only scientists discuss them, they don't become politically relevant. And most of these benefits that I highlighted cannot be realized. So this creating such political relevance is really key, and therefore you need participation of different stakeholders, be it governmental stakeholders, parliamentarians, but definitely also civil society, private sector, finance sector, and so on. Second, participation in that energy modeling is necessary to enable ownership. That is key because on the one hand for relevance, but also since it won't work that way that you once do an energy model and implement it just like that. You have to keep on working on it. You have to keep on revising it in a way and react to innovation and developments. So for that, you need in a way local ownership to really drive this process of continuous modeling there and continuous adjustment of policies. Then, of course, you need to understand sort of the values of the stakeholders in a country, because you can do the modeling in so many different ways. You can put a focus on energy access. You can put a focus on energy independence. You can put a focus on economic optimization or on technological optimization, on diversification of sources, or you can put it in so many directions. So a lot of values are in those models, and you of course should use values of local stakeholders. Then again, local knowledge. Knowledge of people, of which technologies have already worked or haven't worked, what really the preferences of people are. local knowledge really improves the quality of those models. I think in a way Sven will talk about that in his presentation also. Political priorities should be integrated, as I said. To create also the political relevance of those models, you need to sort of adapt the models to the priorities of be it the government or parliament or other stakeholders, to see in which directions the models go. In Tanzania, for example, key was to eradicate energy poverty, but also to enable sort of job growth in the country. In Bangladesh, also, of course, covering the high energy demand and increasing energy demand was key, but also sort of energy independence in a way, and health issues. Another reason why we need strong participation is to validate data. For those models need a lot of data be it on energy demand, or be it on developments of population growth, GDP growth, and so on. And many different sets of data exist, and in order to have a relevant model, you need to use data that governments and other stakeholders accept, and for that also you need to engage in discussions. Otherwise, people will just criticize your model because you used the wrong data. And the last important point why it's important, why this participation aspect is important, is that this way these models act also as a sort of capacity building for stakeholders. I mentioned it before, they can show stakeholders the feasibility, the RE potential, and so on. So stakeholders will learn a lot and will be able to have more informed discussions around energy policy, and therefore make better decisions at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So this is just a graph on how those processes that we engaged in have worked so far. We had usually a first phase of participation in which stakeholders developed a joint vision. And a joint vision meaning, how is the energy system of the country supposed to look like? And that does not mean renewable, not renewable, but rather in the terms of who is supposed to reap benefits? Is it more like a decentralized system or a centralized system? Is a focus maybe on energy access or on energy independence? Do you want to have the cheapest energy system possible? Different sort of joint visions of how the energy system is supposed to look like. And then sort of in a partnership, in a multi-actor setting, we collect data and information necessary, which then both is sort of the basis for modeling. And then at that point, usually Sven started modeling in those processes. And with that scenario, it was possible to do capacity building and to construct a narrative among stakeholders, and then see sort of the scenario and think about which policy changes are necessary, and develop a policy roadmap that should provide the framework to go on a pathway described by the scenario. And then a third phase would be that those actors that we bring together engage in advocacy and communication, and at the end of the day, hopefully policy reform. And I think Sixbert can give some examples of what sort of policy reform in terms of the NDC revision is going on in Tanzania right now based on this scenario. That can be a good example. So that's in a nutshell the sort of process with different steps, how this participatory energy modeling can look like. So next slide, last slide, please. And here just an announcement in a way. I talked about those 3 countries that we worked in before, and there are 3 more to come right now in a project that we engage in, again, Bread for the World, World Future Council, now together with WWF, in 3 countries, Nepal, Uganda, Vietnam. I'm quite happy that Raju is here today speaking also from Nepal Prakriti Resource Center, our partner in Nepal. We have in Uganda, we work with ECHO and WWF Uganda, and in Vietnam with Green ID and WWF Vietnam. I think Raju will speak a little about this project, but these are 3 countries in which we will, in the next years, also engage in participatory energy modeling and hope to successfully steer policies there also towards 100% RE. And with that, I'll leave it and really look forward to the further presentations and discussions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joachim, for this excellent overview. And you're right when you're saying that energy models can prove the feasibility of 100% RE, which is still questions around the world, actually contradictory to our findings in pretty much all the models. And also that energy modeling can inform policy making and target setting, and that vice versa also informs or can inform and can enhance ambitions, because if there's a clear target, it sends a long-term signal. Going back to Slido. So, if you have worked with energy scenarios, what was the goal of your scenarios? You can type in words and then we will have a word cloud. And if you have not worked with energy scenarios, what do you think could be the goal of them? Joachim just gave you some examples of why such scenarios can be useful and how and what kind of policy reform we might be expecting. We can hear later. But I would be really interested to hear from you what would be your goal. So if you are to engage in energy scenario modeling, why are you doing that? And the first words pop up. So we have feasibility, persuade people, and a joint vision for energy, which I guess come from Joachim. So what about the others? So feasibility seems to be one of the more striking features of renewable energy scenarios, which was actually quite helpful, because it obviously also helps us to improve our work in the future. So just to be a bit selfish here, to also use the webinar to inform our future work. We also now have show potential, which probably is very similar to feasibility, and also inform policy making and policy setting, which is also very similar. What else do we have? Draw a clear vision and also a joint vision for energy, which are also quite similar. So I guess having a joint and clear vision to justify or inform policy making based on potential and feasibility analysis probably sums up what currently is being shown here. So we have almost 30 people in the webinar, only 9 have voted, so maybe I can get some others also to do that. I know there's a lot of webinar fatigue currently going on, but maybe I can get you to be a bit more proactive. It would be very much appreciated, of course. While I have been saying that, it still seems quite clear that feasibility and a joint vision for energy seem to be the winners currently. So I will leave that a bit and will inform you after. And we'll just go over to Sven. So Sven, I will share my screen again with you. And you have 20 minutes on lessons learned from 100% RE scenarios. As I said before, Sven is a dear colleague who is joining from Australia today, so it's quite early in the evening already. And he has done a lot of energy scenarios, starting with the renewable energy 24/7 scenario, like maybe not starting, but working with Greenpeace before, now at the University of Technology in Sydney. And he has developed the One Earth climate model, which was introduced, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, but maybe you can say a bit more about that as well.
All right, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that you're all in the webinar, despite what's happened. Joachim said on the other side of the Atlantic, I have to say on the other side of the Pacific, but there is no decision yet, I can tell you. So what I I do is I want to quickly run you through the process of how we actually work on scenarios. So I give a brief overview of what we do and then what we have learned from that. That's a team of researchers at the University of Technology Institute for Sustainable Futures. I work in a team here with 5 to 6 others. That depends on the project level. But we are rapidly increasing our team, and we work on many scenarios. We have published a global scenario, and we have published the 3 country scenarios you just heard from Joachim, plus about 10 other countries. Very diverse, very different countries. Like we just finished Italy. We are currently working on Switzerland and the Czech Republic as well. We have 3 Latin American countries right now in our project work. So we have quite a good overview about what's going on, what's in common for this process, and what is very different. So what we do, the next slide, please, is we have a 7-step approach, and I'm trying to run you through those steps. So we have 7 steps. The first step is mapping the potential for utility scale solar and wind generation. And I'm going through that and explain it a bit in a minute. Then we have a bottom-up demand projection approach for households, industry, same for transport. Based on this overall demand, we develop a long-term energy scenario. And then we take the power sector out of it, so the electricity part, and have a very detailed analysis in 1-hour steps in order to have first an overview about infrastructural changes like power grids, but also to what extent we need to have storage in the future. And that's basically step 6 and 7, where we build load profiles and simulate with actually regional solar and wind data. So the model, we have different parts, and we are just working on, we just are almost there to put all those models in one brand new model, which is then more flexible and also can do more regional breakdowns in one go. So we have the transport model and we have the resource model, which is, we call it ReSpace. So that's renewable energy under space constraints. It's a GIS-based renewable energy potential scenario. Then we have the energy system model and the power system model. So mapping the potential for utility scale solar and wind generation is basically a GIS and geographic information system approach, and provides maps for solar and wind potentials under space constraint. I actually deliberately took out the example of Bangladesh, as Bangladesh has, from all countries, we have done one of the highest space constraints. So what we do is we first have a look where is actually a good wind potential for the good wind potential is something where we have more than 5.5 meters per second on average wind speed. And that's wind data and meteorological data we get from an open source database, which is called Renewable Ninja, which is from the ETH Zurich. And then we see, okay, this is in theory the amount of, or the area which is good for wind generation. For wind generation, for wind power, and then we subtract all the areas that are like residential and urban settlements, infrastructure for transport like rail and roads, industrial areas, intensive agricultural production land, and so on, nature conservation areas, national parks, wetlands, and swamps. And then we see how much is left. Usually there is still quite a bit left. in the case of Bangladesh, there was not much left, and the wind resource itself wasn't great either. So we expanded the research to the offshore wind potential, which was larger, and but then we have the problem that the wind power generation is relatively concentrated in a specific area and not distributed across the entire country, but that can happen. So the next one is the bottom-up demand projection for households. What we do is we have 9 standard households. That's basically 3 different types for rural households, 4 for urban households, and 2 for suburban. And what we are trying to do with that is, for example, for the case of Tanzania, we had the rural phase 1 were households which have very little or hardly any equipment, like just light bulbs and maybe a radio or maybe a mobile phone charger. And then we step by step assume that households, both in the rural area as well as in urban areas, will have the same standard. So what we want to do with that is we would like to develop a specific standard for households across the country, also to bridge the gap between the situation in rural areas and suburban areas. So first we identify in cooperation with local partners, and that's where Bread for the World and World Future Council usually comes in, helps us to discuss what is required, what is currently the status quo, and what is desired. Then the second step in that is what is the percentage of those different households? So how many percent in region A, we break it down in 8 regions. In region 1, what is the percentage of households who have the equipment equal to phase 1 rural area, and how many phase 2, and so on. So we have a distribution of the current situation, and then we project from there that the household equipment will rise and will basically become standard fully equipped households like in industrialized countries. We do the same, slightly the same with the industry. What we have is we have the current GDP data and see where does the GDP come from? Is it manufacturing industry? Is it mining? Is it iron and steel? Is it cement? And so on. This is an international database from World Bank, so that's available for all countries. But what we need to do is, again, that's where the local partners come in. We need to make sure that the development pathway is projected. So what is the plan of the government in the future? Where do we want to go? Combined or connected with the GDP is an energy intensity per dollar GDP for all the different sectors. So for example, each dollar earned GDP, but the cement industry has a specific amount of energy. And this is a statistical value. There is a world average, and then there is regional, the regional situation, which could be very different from the world average. Just to give you an example, the Chinese iron and steel industry is currently one of the most efficient ones in the world, just because the manufacturing equipment in China has been built only in the last decade or 2 decades, while established industry like here in Australia or in Germany are older, and sometimes the manufacturing equipment is actually older and therefore more inefficient. This is again where we need local knowledge. Then we have bottom-up demand projection for transport. So we use the same cluster with the different household types, and then we identify how many kilometers a person actually travels on average. This is data also available in databases, but we have to verify that with local contacts. And then we develop a future scenario, a future vision with the people, again, with help of World Future Council and Bread for the World and local partners. What is the desired outcome? So in what direction we want to go in terms of transport, rural transport, urban transport? Is it possible to expand public transport? In some cases, it's not. If it's very rural area, then you have more individual transport. But if you're closer to urban areas, then obviously public transport is the option. And so that's how we develop this. So we have, and if we put all this together, we actually have a total demand and develop then, based on the demand, a supply scenario. I'm just running through because I wanted to come to the lessons learned. And based on that energy scenario we have, so for where the entire energy is modeled, so not just electricity required for that, but also the heating demand, which is to a large extent, at least at the beginning, not electricity, and transport, which is definitely fuel currently, and that might go more to electricity in the future, or will go. So I'm skipping that now and going to the lessons learned. So first, renewable energy potential. I already said it's very different in each country. Sometimes we have very uneven distribution, so we require local knowledge, which also means we want to have local acceptance, because one thing is very clear in a 100% renewable energy scenario where we have a lot of distributed energy, the generation will move closer to the consumer, and that means that you will see more what your generation, or basically your generation equipment. So if you have, if you will see wind turbines, you will see solar panels. So you will have an acceptance issue, and that's better to have in a consensus if you plan this together. And therefore we need the local knowledge, and we need to know the local discussion. Usually solar rooftop is the most cost competitive option for implementation for households, and does not take up extra space because it's on the roof. While utility scale solar will to some extent take up some extra areas. However, there are options for multiple use. So for example, to have agricultural solar, where I just saw one new innovative project where the panels were actually vertical, and they basically used the field very smart as an agricultural land plus an energy generation. But this is new. And then we have utility scale solar, for example, where we identified that for a very good option for Bangladesh as floating solar. So we use all the water space, or the spaces which get flooded on a regular basis, in order to use this and not take up the valuable land which is used for agriculture, for food production, or for living. Then we have onshore wind potential, as I said in the beginning, in tropical countries, usually very low, or the problem that you either have no wind or too much. If you have typhoon season, then you might have the situation that you have once a year far too much wind, and the remaining year basically nothing. So onshore wind in tropical countries is usually lower, while in the in almost all industrialized countries, in wind is in a vast majority of countries is one of the main options. offshore wind for countries who have access to the sea, obviously. Offshore wind is basically the new kid in town because the costs went down significantly over the past few years. And now offshore wind is a very viable and cost competitive option. We did a scenario for Vietnam last year, and we identified Vietnam as the next big area or big region for offshore wind development. Vietnam acknowledged that, and there is quite a bit of offshore wind development going on, but also in other parts of Asia, like in China and Japan, in South Korea. There are outside Europe, there are many places where offshore wind actually now starts to become viable. And then we need to accept ecological limits and impacts from utility scale renewables, mainly hydro and bioenergy. We need to take that into account, and therefore we need to be very clear that renewables not necessarily mean there is no environmental impact. We really have to look for what kind of technology and where. So the variety increases, so different technologies increases security of supply and decreases storage needs. That's another lesson learned. Here's just an example of the potential sites for solar power in Costa Rica. The red dots are basically the best sites, and then orange is not so good, but usually the solar potential is an order of magnitude higher than what's required. Usually we use only 5 to maximum 10% in terms of solar. This is very important. We have different wind scenarios where we say this is the wind potential that's for Costa Rica under the scenario just the technical and wind speed. Then we subtract the slopes, so all the mountain areas where we usually can't build, and then we also subtract everything which is further away from an existing grid, because that's another very important measure. And then usually with every step, with every layer of restrictions, we have a lower potential. And in the case of Costa Rica, we ended up with 18 gigawatts of wind potential, which is still very sufficient for Costa Rica. And even with the highest restrictions, we ended up with 200 gigawatts of solar, far more than anything vaguely what Costa Rica needs even in 50 years. Lessons learned: demand projection. We are usually starting from a very different point in each country, but we aim to achieve a fair living standard for everyone. We require local knowledge from partner organizations, I already said that. And cooking is a big issue, especially in developing countries where we have still quite a bit of cooking on open fire. So, and collecting firewood is an impact, not just for the environment, but also open fire in the building has health issues and lots of gender issues, because usually women collect the wood for hours and hours a day. So that's an impact. However, there is food is always very in the center of the region and of the culture of the region. So is it okay to cook with electricity, yes or no? And the answer is very diverse depending on the region. Efficiency and potential to exploit that is very important to slow down the demand increase in developing countries. So I said that deliberately because the demand will definitely increase in the developing countries no matter what. But if there's efficiency involved, the demand increase will be not as fast as without. And then we want to bridge the gap between rural and urban areas, same household standards for all, which also is a point very important for the population distribution. We have in the experience, or not we everyone has the experience who is knowledgeable in that field, that many, especially young people, go to the big cities because there are jobs, there is electricity for service industry, and in rural areas there is none, and therefore a lot of people move from rural areas to urban areas and increase the pressure on urban areas and development. And that's why bridging the gap is good for, as such, for a country to keep the population distributed. So local knowledge, cultural sensitivity, and pragmatism are the ingredients for a good demand projection, from my experience. And thirdly, the energy supply projection. We always have an increased electrification of the transport sector and heating, and that will lead to significant different infrastructure. What we experience and we modeled, I personally have experience of more than 50 countries modeling, and a rule of thumb is if you electrify the transport system, you roughly double the electricity demand of a country. So, for example, if Australia would implement total electrification of the transport sector, which is a lot individual transport, then our electricity demand will not exactly double, but close to. And that means this additional electricity need to come from renewables in order to make it carbon neutral, otherwise it won't make sense. We have local resources and local generation mix, it's very different. And we need knowledge about the existing energy sector, which is very vital to develop a meaningful concept. So, for example, if there are old power plants in the country, we need to know what will happen with this. Is there a plan to shut them down? Is there a place to replace them, and how to replace? So all this is very important to know, and we will see, and that's a given in all countries, that variable generation, solar and wind, will dominate because they're simply cheaper than basically all other technologies. I just wanted to highlight that solar and wind is variable, but not fluctuating. You hear that quite often, that fluctuating generation. Fluctuating means that it's sort of unpredictable. In terms of solar, neither the sunrise nor the sunset comes as a surprise, and therefore it's not fluctuating. We have very good measures now and knowledge on a global scale to forecast solar and wind, and therefore we can very well forecast the expected wind generation. We need to work with local utilities, as a decentralized renewable energy future needs public support and local support. Coming now, wrapping up to the report. The World Future Council and Bread for the World published and wrote, and I have to say I didn't do it. I gave input, but so I don't want to claim any I wouldn't claim that report, but I would like to present it in terms of what the findings are. So technical. 100% renewable energy system is cheaper, and that is in basically all cases we calculated, because first, fuel cost savings can refinance the investments, and secondly, renewables except biomass usually don't have any fuel costs or fuel supply involved. 100% renewables is best suited to provide energy access for all, because we usually use bottom-up electrification via mini-grid clusters. So that means we start, in the case, for example, of Tanzania, where there is no electricity supply, we start with mini-grids, a combined system of solar, wind, maybe a little bit of biomass, or mini-hydro, later on with storage in the first phase, maybe with the existing diesel generators. Those mini grid clusters get connected with other mini grids in the surroundings. This bigger cluster again gets connected with, at the end, with the transmission system. So basically, the system grows bottom up, and that's much quicker because you can actually start on very different areas at the same time. We have significant improvements in energy efficiency. I already said that, also to save local resources such as fuel. A mix of different technologies, like mix of solar, wind, and hydro, and biomass, and other like offshore wind. The more diverse the generation is, the better the security of supply, and usually the storage demand later on goes down. And it's very important to highlight that we do need 100% renewables to achieve a decarbonization of the energy system, but we should not forget that we also need forests. We cannot afford to continue forest destruction. So we need to stop deforestation and start reforestation, not only as carbon sinks, but also. In terms of social, the civil society needs to bridge the gap, both within the society, the gap, but also a knowledge gap. We need to have a diligently map of stakeholders. So we need the civil society, academia, we need the energy sector, governments, and our financial sector to get involved in that. We need to build a platform for that. And we also need to find meaningful examples. For example, we had, or Bread for the World and Future Councils connected Tanzania with Bangladesh, local level experience of renewables, and those two countries are more meaningful rather than if you point to Australia, to Germany, because they see more that a country which is sort of in the same phase of development is more meaningful to them. We need to develop interactive workshops formats to organize the dialogue, and very important, no hit and run campaigns. So it must be a long-term commitment for the energy work in the country as a network, and not just drop a few panels and leave. That has never achieved anything. So that's a much lessons learned. Avoid that at all costs. And we need to be sensitive, the sensitivity for cultural specific is very important. So we listen what's needed, don't tell others what they want. And that's very important. To finish off, policy, make it relevant. So know the drivers of renewables in the country. In some country, it is not the fact that renewables don't have carbon emissions. Sometimes it is more important for the country that to become energy self-sufficient, or to create local jobs, or to keep the money, the income in the country, and not, if you buy fuel which is not from your country, the money will leave the country. Well, if you pay the same amount per energy unit for local generated energy, the money will remain in the country. We need to make sure that the strengthen the policy situation, just transition, socioeconomic aspects are important. So if there is a coal industry in the country, it is important to talk, how is a transition possible? What are the experiences? Vested interests obviously can jeopardize and hold on this, or hold off this process significantly. I think that I don't need to explain that. The policy science interface should be strengthened. We should have science-based targets and make research accessible and relevant. And this is also for me as a scientist, I need to actually make my work relevant to local politicians, to local people, and not just drop a scientific paper. And we need to have active linkage with other initiatives. Do not compete, but cooperate with other players. There's so many out there. There is on the international level, IRENA, there's Sustainable Energy for All. There are so many international, but also local initiatives, and cooperate with them. And with this, I would like to, I have stolen that paragraph but, from the report, which I like very much. So our work needs to focus on bridging the gap between science and policy. We need to foster science-based policy making by integrating academia into policy needs. We need to have scientifically sound 100% renewable pathways and also need to be backed by opinion leaders. We need to have decision-making needs to build up in the needs of the will of the people, and we can achieve 100% renewables for all. On the technical side, I have to say, we never had a problem to achieve that. On the economical side, in the long run, it always paid off. The main barrier we have seen so far is always the policy-making process. And if you have further questions, here's my email address and a little commercial at the end. We have that open access book, so it's for free. If you want to see what we have done on a global level, here you are. You can download the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sven, and also thanks from the audience. I think everybody is quite intrigued by your, to quote, decades of your experience. And I'm always very amazed to hear you speak. I have seen all your charts and Excel sheets a couple of times now. I'm still always a bit scared about them, but I guess not being a very technical person, that goes without saying, maybe. I found it very interesting that you were talking about the local acceptance and how really participatory energy modeling can increase local acceptance of renewable energy once risks, perceived or real risks, are being addressed. That being said, I am looking at the chat every now and then. So yes, we will share the recording and also the presentations if Sven and Joachim are okay with it with you afterwards. And we will also upload them on the World Future Council website. There were also a couple of questions which I would like to take up later. But first of all, I would like to invite my colleague from Tanzania, Sixbert, to speak shortly about his experience in using the 100% renewable energy scenario in Tanzania. What kind of advocacy activities were you able to do, Sixbert? And what kind of policy outcomes did you achieve so far? Joachim already mentioned the NDC process currently. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that. Thank you. We can't hear you though. I can see that you are talking, but yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I can ask you, Joachim and Sven, and also me to leave the video be in case it's a bandwidth issue. And Sixbert, you might be needing to be talked closer to the microphone. Maybe you sound a bit metallic. Okay, let me try to fix that. That are the choice of virtual meetings, I guess. Okay, Sixbert, I will contact you separately. In that case, Raju, might I ask you to just start, and we will get back to you, Sixbert, afterwards.
Yes, I can do that, Anna. Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Anna, for inviting me to this webinar. it's a very timely and very interesting webinar, and it was very insightful to hear from Joachim and also Sven. Well, I think this is something that we are quite interested in, as you have very rightly said in the beginning, that Nepal with Prakriti Resources Center and WWF Nepal are now part of this 100% RE project, which we're quite excited about. We have the objective of setting up the MAP platform with all the actors in this area with related to renewable energy and also the climate change. At the same time, we also intend to engage with the policymakers and the government stakeholders. But at the same time, whatever lessons that we learn, we also intend to share nationally, regionally, and also globally. So I think this is something quite interesting project that we are starting now. But of course, this COVID has not been that easy for us to get started. But still, now this has begun, and we're quite excited that at some point of time, I'm guessing that Sven will also help us in making preparing the scenario that we're talking about for Nepal. And I already see that a lot of exciting elements that he brought up during his learning will also be very valuable for us. And I tend to agree with a lot of things. Well, with this a little bit of background on this part, let me just come back to the context of Nepal. First of all, well, Nepal is a landlocked country. So the kind of scenario that we'll be talking about, or the energy that the context that we'll be talking, we'll have to look into this context that most of our fossil fuel or whatever the energy that that is being used in transportation industries are mostly imported from India. Almost 100% of that fossil fuel based energy is imported from India. Not just that, we also import almost about over 500 megawatts of electricity directly from India. So it means that Nepal is a very a country that relies on international sources of energy. So, but then on the other hand, this is also a country where the poverty level is still, we have more than 21% of the population falling under the poverty line. That's less than $1 per day. So it means that, this links directly to the energy poverty as well. But when we talk about this energy consumption, energy utilization, and going for the future and what we want to look into, this also comes in a context of the climate change, because of course, energy is something that we will always need to perhaps socially and economically to advance forward. But at the same time, how do you do this sustainably is also coming in the context that of the climate change now. So because we tend to envision, or let's say look into the future scenario, because we're also trying to be compatible with the context of climate change. And that's where the whole debate and discussion and discourses come, that we have to look into more into renewable energy. And having said that, Nepal is already, is a country, whatever energy that it produces internally is mostly coming from what we call it renewable energy, and mostly it's coming from hydropower sector. And when you talk about this hydropower sector, we have, it has a high potential. We say that almost Nepal has because more than 6,000 rivers and rivulets are there in the country. We have potential of almost more than, over, let's say, 80,000 megawatts of energy can be generated from hydropower alone. But then if you see on the production side, we only have about 1,200 megawatts of energy produced from the hydropower sector. So there's a huge gap of what the potential it is and what the production has been done. That's also the reason why we rely on India and other sources. And whatever energy that comes from India is basically coming from the coal-fired power plants and that's generated in India. So on one side, you see that there's a huge potentiality. On the other side, we said that there's a huge energy poverty. And interestingly, we are in the path to progressing. Like in 2020, around 2000, less than 20% of the population had access to electricity. But now coming to 2020, we have almost about 85% of the people, connected to electricity. But of course, now connection and utilization or getting the flow of energy 24 hours is a different story. Like you could really come like once, sometimes in a week or in a couple of hours in a week. So it fluctuates in that terms. But at least the access wise, that has been the numbers of the government. Now, when we look into going forward in this scenario, that what we intend to look is what is government really planning? We're looking from the civil society perspective. What is the government really planning? What should the government really do? Is it enough? Is it not? Or is there a chance for us to come and play? And I think this is where exactly the MAP project or MAP 100% RE project also comes in. So to say that, we have a discussion and discourse with varieties of actors coming from private sector, from government, politicians, civil society organization, and see that what is the need and what is the potentiality in the country, but at the same time also looking at the scenario, what the government has actually committed. For instance, Nepal has already committed the Paris Agreement. It submitted its nationally determined contributions, and in the past, it said that almost about 80% of the energy will come from the renewable energy by 2050. And we think that Nepal could do much more than that. So in the currently updated energy version, that there's an effort to really push this into going for a more 100% energy. Now, also, of course, Nepal has been part of this SDG goals, and it has set up very interesting and a very, I would say, ambitious goal to meet the SDG targets as well. It says that it wants to meet electricity, under the SDG 7, almost 99% of the people will have renewable, RE access. I think that's a quite interesting part. But at the same time, in Nepal, we heavily use firewood, as Spain said earlier, firewood or cow dungs and other biomass in terms of cooking, or in terms of making food for their livestock, for instance. So I think this consumes quite a lot of biomass, and that's where the effort is also to reduce that biomass being burnt. That saves the forest. At the same time, also as Spino was saying about the health and the gender issues and all those things is also very looking forward. And as I said earlier, we import all our fossil fuel coming from India now, with also the people's capacity gradually increasing, because there's a lot of remittance coming from Middle East and other places into the country. So people have also shifted from burning, let's say, from biomass to cook into liquefied petroleum gas, and that all comes from India, and that's been one of our major source of emission as well, apart from the transportation sector. And when this grows, then there is an effort that maybe we're not doing very good. So we have to look into the scenario where we are reducing the consumption of the fossil fuel, including the LP gas, at the same time also the biomass, but then that being replaced by the renewable energy. And this is also the plan the government has under the SDG 7's targets. But when government or let's say the Nepal is looking forward to having this, and one of the things that on the hydropower it also has is, almost about in the next 10 years, Nepal intends to build about 10,000 megawatts of hydropower. It means that a huge amount of energy coming will be developed. With that energy, Nepal, of course, the consumption, we may not be able to consume all that energy by ourselves. So there's also talk that maybe Bangladesh, which is also relying heavily on the coal, maybe they are interested in buying that. And in fact, in one of their recent visits, what Bangladesh also signed a contract with Nepal to say that we would like to purchase at least in very near future 1,000 megawatts of hydropower energy. I think that's where Bangladesh is also going. There's also regional cooperation. There's also talk about how Nepal's produced electricity can be utilized in India, where they can replace the coal-fired energy that is coming in India. So there's on one side, we see that there's a lot of producing clean energy and then utilizing within the country, and also addressing poverty at the same time, while also feeding to industries and other sectors. But at the same time, the other side would be to look into our regional cooperation, what Nepal and India can do, or Nepal and Bangladesh can do, so that really moves forward. So now coming to this context of having a scenario, I think Nepal would extremely benefit out of this, to say that, we say that the data shows that almost every year, Nepal consumes about, Nepal pays to India about $2 billion to purchase fossil fuel energy. That's, petroleum products, gas, and also coal. And of course, we do not have a coal-fired power plant in Nepal, but still the brick kilns and the, some of the industries use that coal as well. So there is a whole tendency for us to see that in the future that we are gradually replacing that, and that $2 billion, I mean, if we gradually reduce that, that money could be used for other social and economic sectors. So the money, if it's retained inside the country, probably we can use in health sector or education or infrastructure and other things. And now let me also tell you this, that interestingly, we have a budget, every year budget of about only $13 billion US. And out of that, I mean, a country with a $13 billion US budget, and then we are buying like almost $2 billion US fossil fuel just from India. That's a lot of money going out just for that. And then of course, in addition to that, we also buy a lot of our whatever vehicles, cars, buses that we have, all those coming from India. So it means that if you also count that, there's a lot of money going outside. So what I would say is that in going forward with all this scenario, the kind of scenario that Sven was talking about in terms of making us in the future, that we have to look into certain things. One, of course, we want to see and have a long-term vision, maybe by 2050 or beyond that, to see that how Nepal can really do well in terms of replacing its dirty fuel, or let's say they're going into a renewable energy. One, looking from a climate angle, so that it's also, when you are doing socially and economically better, we also want to see that there is environmental integrity in our development context. One. The other thing is, when you are taking these actions on 100% RE, we like to see that poverty is being addressed, so that all people have opportunity to progress and go forward. I think it shouldn't be just one section of the society really progressing or going forward, and the others are not doing so good. The third thing is, in this process, the process also has to be very justice oriented. It means that you're not just going to, if you're going to build, let's say, the solar farm in one of the places, then you're not going to use poor people's farm, so that or agricultural land to do that. So the justice side, the gender issues, or the indigenous people's rights, and that part has to be very, very much come into this consideration, so that there is a democratic principles being added to that. And the final point that I want to say is that when we are going into forward, that we are not being into a compulsion of pushing hard by external factors, that we are being we are having to take on the burden that Nepal is not able to take. It means that if there is a technological push that we are not able to maintain, or there is an investment that our economy is not able to handle, that push should not also come from outside just because we want to get into that. It means gradually we should be allowed to say that of course, we want to reduce our fossil fuel consumption, or the money that's going to into international sources, and then develop our own. But at the same time, look into that part that this effort is contributing to the sustainable development concept. So with that, I think those few concepts that which Sven said in his final slides of learning, I would very much agree with that. And I will end my saying with that. And then if there's anything, of course, I'm happy to come back and discussion. I did have some little of numbers, but I think I'll just limit that here now, and I'll get back to you, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raju. I think that is very important what you just said, and I'm really curious to see how it turns out, what kind or how large the fossil fuel cost savings will be in the end when Nepal would be switching to 100% renewable energy. So I'm very much looking forward to start that whole process, hopefully soon. As you might be aware, given the current situation, the project has been delayed a bit, unfortunately. So Raju, I really hope we can meet up in person next year and drive that transition forward in Nepal. So I will try to work with Siegfried one more time. Unfortunately, there are some internet connection issues currently in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. So let's hope his connection is strong enough now. Siegfried, do you want in 5 minutes or so just tell us a bit about your experience with advocacy and the modeling?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay,
so thank you so much, and I'm very sorry that I couldn't come on the first hand when you called me, but thank you so much for such an opportunity, and thank you so much for organizing this very important event where we can share some of the experiences. So I just wanted to start by saying that the whole, if I were to trace how we really came up with the scenario within Tanzania, this can be traced back to 2014 to 2015. By that time, the whole concept was more of low carbon development. And in that regard, the concept was such emerging, and it was really new. But 1 year later, let's say at the end of 2015, then we started talking, seeing what could be the potential of renewable energy in the whole concept of realizing the low carbon development growth, or yes. So by that time, then in 2016, we had to bring together some potential stakeholders ranging from NGO and CSO, the media, the research, the universities, government, members of parliament, and the ministries to discuss the whole, like, what is it that renewable energy could do, add when it comes to first contributing to socioeconomic transformation in that regard, helping the country to achieve the middle income economy. And again, to make sure that we contribute on reducing energy poverty, especially in the countryside where majority have limited access to electricity, and whereby the extension of the national grid has proved to be super expensive, so to speak. So, when we started talking about 100% RIE, it was unbelievable. Everyone was not saying like, what is this? And no one was there to listen, ranging from the civil society themselves to the research institutions. Forget about, leave apart now the government, who could not even, were not convinced, and they wanted to have some kind of studies. Of course, that came later. So we kept on pushing together, especially with and big thanks to Bread for the World and the World Future Council. They were always there to make sure that we realized the target. So later, then we had even to organize a study tour to some of the members of parliament of Bangladesh to study, to work on solar home systems and something of that kind. So later, then in the same year, that's when people wanted, like demanded to have a kind of study which could really show what could be the contribution of renewable energy and how the scenario could look like, and what is it that the scenario, the renewable energy could contribute to the socioeconomic systems and transformation, so to speak. So far, then like, I won't be repeating what was done, but just to remember that we didn't leave anyone behind. You can imagine we had to bring even people who had no concept on energy, and to really discuss and take much time to discuss on what is it that renewable energy could bring into this country. So then that's when we had to discuss and then agree on coming up with a 100% renewable energy scenario, which I'm very proud of. A great man and a friend of mine, Seven, and of course Joachim and Anna, to really push this forward. So for me now, my work is to just give you some few sentences or points on how the scenario really helped us. First of all, that when it was developed, it was such inclusive, and everyone was brought on board, and to really show that to really create the demand for it and increase the thirst that people wanted it. And at the end, when it came out, then like the launching itself was such impressive, and then we had to bring a lot of stakeholders within the region. Then it didn't end up being the country issue. Then it was brought in some of the members of some media from Kenya, Malawi, Uganda, Rwanda, so to learn, and maybe Joachim should tell us, maybe that's the reason for why Uganda is part of the process now. So one of the important learning or thing which has helped us after having this scenario, which I'm very proud, is that the scenario has really managed, for me, the way I look at it, it has really managed to work while we are asleep. You know what I mean? I mean, like the way Seven and the colleagues we developed this the scenario, it has come out as a document which is able to speak while you don't need to be there, you don't need to see 7, you don't need to see 6, but to show what could be the role of renewable energy into the whole concept of national development and achieving the middle income country. And so to contribute that, I was like already, Anna and Joachim already mentioned this already, that even when we are not in the meeting, they will still use it. So it's a really, like at the moment, it's a really working document. So to speak, that it's part, it has really guided a lot and provided a lot of input in the NDC division this moment. And I felt like they didn't want, they were not supposed even to invite me, because the way the scenario has really shaped the government, the way the national allies or the government has to set and develop revise the current NDCs. It was enough that you don't need to be there. So for me, I think this is a very big achievement. And even I also noticed that also it has contributed a lot to when we were undertaking the National Climate Change Review, a National Climate Change Strategy Review. So these are the documents which will be in all the groups, and you don't need to be there to explain or to bring the point and something of that kind. That is a very important point for me. And also, the other thing is that how the different institutions and the ministries and the stakeholders are able to use that as they think of what could be the best energy mix within the country, and what is it that this document and renewable energy in particular could contribute to ending real poverty, I mean the economic poverty, at the end, at the same time realizing or ending or solving the issue of energy poverty itself. So that is a very important achievement we have really experienced. In so doing, then we ended up being friendly to a lot of people who wanted to explain. You know, 7 is more technical at one point. Like sometimes they don't, like they want to know like what is it that this scenario mean, and if we are even asked to simplify it into a very simple language, you know. So for me, that is a very good thing. It brings us closer to the ministries and whoever who was hating us. So for me, I think it was very great, and it didn't end up being a national document, but it also ended up being a tool for Tanzania visibility, you know. But we didn't intend that. We wanted to develop a document which could shape the energy, which could show the energy forecast and what is it that renewable energy could contribute to country development and something of that kind. But then having our logo there, then it ended up being a tool for visibility, to increase our visibility. But that time we were growing. So the demand has increased, which could be taken as a positive and a negative. So some of the people, they think Tanzania is super strong, I think, is very strong, but at the same time, some maybe which could be pushing us now to move out of our comfort zone is that to make sure that we have enough expertise, because there's so much demand to do a lot of these things at national level. And the other point is the other thing is how we really managed to develop a memorandum of understanding between the ministry, especially the Ministry of Energy, where now we have become a potential renewable energy expertise and best wishers when it comes to energy. So, when it comes to energy access and advancing clean and affordable energy within the country. So at the moment now we are working together. There is so much demand from the ministry and from the government that we work together now on developing other long-term renewable energy and energy efficiency strategies, which is an opportunity, of course, and we need to do the same. Probably we need to go back to the same team or whatever. So, but this is a very nice approach or opportunity. And again, that this also has given us enough time to work with others. So they see us as a people, the best wishers of the country and the expertise, the advisor and the good friend. So yeah, so I think this is what I can say very quickly, and I will stop there at the moment.
Thank you very much, Siegfried. I think it's excellent to hear that the scenario actually enabled Can Tanzania to become a supporter of the government and to increase their knowledge and also capacities to work on renewable energy. And I'm very happy to hear that the findings are going to be considered for some parts of it at least are going to be considered for the NDC revision process. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of that and where the journey goes basically. With that, we are actually at the end of our webinar. And there were two questions. One was already being answered, but just in case you did not look at the chat, Rocky asked if the bioenergy potential, how the bioenergy potential is treated in regards to land use and land use change. Sven, do you just for everybody want to say something very shortly about that?
Yes, what I answered in the chat is we have quite strict standards for bioenergy. We don't use energy plantations, and we use the available data for the potential for residual waste. And that's usually a percentage of bioenergy or biomass from fields, which allows that a certain percentage of the biomass will actually remain on the field, because that's required for sustainable agriculture, and just some parts will be used for bioenergy. So we have on a global level a very strict standard of 80 exajoule. I think what we have for the global level is probably the lowest from all scenarios. There are some scenarios which use up to, just to have a comparison, we use 80, and there are some scenarios who use up to 1000 exajoule. And that would mean that a substantial amount of agricultural area would be dedicated for energy production and not for food production. And therefore, we try to avoid that. We avoid that. We're not trying to avoid that. We avoid that.
Thank you. And one last question. There's a debate on the on H2 hubs. Where are the best places and what is the most sustainable international approach? So Sven, maybe first part of the question, where are the best places for hydrogen production and H2 in one sentence?
Best places are those who have both land and good solar and wind resources. That's probably Australia, or it's definitely Australia. This is past parts of the Middle East. It could be also parts of, let's say, very good solar potentials in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, and in the southern part of South America, where there's lots of wind, but also in the US. So there are a few places where we have good wind and solar resources and enough space. And we tend to factor in the production of hydrogen and synthetic fuels in regions where there's already a energy production, like for example in the Middle East. We can use parts of the infrastructure and sort of recycle the infrastructure and have contribute to just transition. What we don't see is in our scenarios, we don't want to have sort of energy colonialism, where sort of Europe goes into Africa or Latin America or Asia, produces hydrogen there and exports everything back to Europe, and the local people have nothing. That's definitely not what we want.
And with that, maybe one sentence from you, Joachim. I know that this is a topic you have been working on quite closely currently, so maybe you want to say something about that as well. What is the most sustainable international approach to hydrogen?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Actually, we are currently working on a study with Sven together on sustainability standards for hydrogen production, especially with a focus on the global south, because we think that, of course, hydrogen has ecological but also social implications in producing countries. Sven mentioned energy colonialism. That's definitely something we need to avoid. So we are currently developing criteria for that, which we can hopefully present by the end of the year, and then give a closer answer to that. But definitely it's important to learn from failures like the bioenergy debate or also desert tech, and put in focus really the demands of people in then hydrogen producing countries. And for that also we need, again, participatory approaches. We need to discuss with local people also about hydrogen production and include it into the local energy transition to make sure that hydrogen production is really additional to local energy production. For that we need participatory approaches, and I think global governance on that is currently under construction. We look into that as well, but I cannot yet go into further detail.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to almost close the session. So let me.
Anna,
so, yes.
I just have one question to Sven, actually, if that's okay from my side. I just wanted to ask him, like in this, when you're talking about the scenario, how does he consider the nuclear in that part? And also, I mean, when you're talking about hydropower, like, you know, there's a lot of standards on this, that like what scale would be renewable energy and what scale will be beyond that? Is there any kind of a general understanding? Like, you know, internationally, they say it's 20 megawatts is fine, maybe beyond that, not really green or things like that. So just his experience on that part and while he's doing his scenarios, that'd be interesting to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, we basically we use the ecological standards for hydropower for the International Committee for Rivers. It is not the exact term; it just slipped my mind. But there is a global NGO standard where they agreed on a standard for ecological standard for hydropower. There is not a fixed number in terms of megawatt for hydropower, because if you have a small river and you squeeze the entire river through a hydropower plant, then 1 megawatt could be not sustainable, while a large river could easily host maybe 10 megawatts or even more, 100, and it's still possible. So I would say that's a case-by-case study, but there are certain standards to be followed, and that's what we also need the regional context. In terms of nuclear, first, nuclear is not renewable. Secondly, we have a cost-efficient approach. Nuclear is by far the most expensive technology right now, and therefore we don't even need to continue the discussion about nuclear. When we talk about costs, nuclear is out of the equation.
Thank you, Sven. So as you can see here, we have one more Slido question. So obviously we want to learn and also improve our work and see what do you think where the journey is going with 100% RE. So there are certain topics which have been discussed already. There are certain trends which have been taken up, but where do you see the work and the advocacy work going in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? So do you have any further suggestions on webinar topics and also for our work? We have already one answer, which is scenario development. And while this is just being on, and you can join it at slido.com using this number here. Just very quickly, because we are coming to the end. As I said, this was the first webinar in a webinar series on the Lessons Learned publication, which Sven kindly presented. The second one is going to be held on the 12th of November and will feature my colleague Joachim again, but also my colleague Eduardo Noboa from the World Future Council, Fentia Jacobsen from the WWF, and our partner in Costa Rica, Adrian Martinez Blanco from La Ruta del Clima. And it will actually revolve around the topic of participation. So how do we get the participation in participatory energy modeling? And it's titled Stronger Together, Multi-Actor Partnerships for 100% RE in the Global South. And for that, if you have any questions, you can also write to me at anna.skofron@worldfuturecouncil.org. And as I said, we will follow up with a webinar with the slides and also the recording probably next week. Just give us a bit of time to prepare and sort ourselves out again. And with that, I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.